Hi, folks. Welcome to a Blazor Power Hour. I'm Ed Charbonneau, and I've been working with Blazor and Maui a bit over the last few weeks. A friend of mine, Sam Basu, he's also working in the Maui space, and he showed me a really cool trick the other day that I thought I would share with you all. So let's take a look at a Maui Blazor Hybrid app, and we'll look at some of the ways that we can debug and test that application. So the tools are getting better. There's a new feature that they just added in the latest release. We should probably talk about that as well. Looks like there's some new bits that just shipped. I know .NET Preview 7 has shipped. Let's take a look. Let's get our screen share up and running here. Um, First of all, we've got a brand new ASP.NET Core preview. I would recommend not installing it though, and I'll tell you why. We are on .NET 7 Preview 4 now, and while there's all these nice new shiny things that have come with this release, it does conflict with Maui. I have had to uninstall all of my preview bits. We were kind of promised this side by side installation type of thing with .NET, and for some reason, Maui doesn't play by the rules. So if you do install the Preview 7 bits, you're going to notice that your Maui templates in Visual Studio go bye bye. Yeah, that's right. So you'll try to start a new Maui app, and they are now missing from Visual Studio. If you run into that problem and you're on Windows, things are fairly easy to resolve. Basically, you need to go back and uninstall .NET 7 Preview, and your Maui templates will then come back into Visual Studio. I also had some problems compiling when this happened, and other tooling as well, not connecting properly with Maui apps. So first, topic of troubleshooting and debugging with Maui is until this conflict with side-by-side installations is resolved with Maui, I would avoid installing .NET 7 previews. Yeah. So eventually, um, Maui will be on .NET 7, and I don't know if that's going to resolve the side-by-side issue, but hopefully they figure it out before that. Um, it took quite a bit of like searching to figure out what happened. Actually, some friends on Twitter helped me out. I got tired of beating my head against the wall and kind of just tweeted it out. And some folks came back and said, "Yeah, we've got the same problem." It turned out to be .NET 7 Preview. All right, so do check out .NET 7 Preview, but be aware that you can't do it at the same time you're checking out Maui. So little heads up there. That's one of the first troubleshooting tips I'll give today. And welcome to the show, folks. We got some people in chat. Bit O'Brien, welcome. Hey, Vicky, welcome. Nice to see you. Or sorry, Vic. My apologies there. Hey there, Vic. Um, So I have the latest and hottest bits of Maui up and running. There is also some documentation that goes along with this, and let's get that back up on the screen too. So before um, just a few weeks ago, we couldn't really debug the Blazor hybrid, the Blazor part of Blazor hybrid very well. And I'll shoot a link to this documentation out into chat so you can all see that if you'd like, just for a reference there. And let's go ahead and start a brand new Blazor hybrid application for folks that haven't seen that process yet. So let's get a screen share going on Visual Studio here. Actually, let me do, I know this is going to do the good old Hall of Mirrors. I need to get a second screen up and running, so that doesn't happen anymore. But I haven't quite done that yet. So here we are, Visual Studio. Visual Studio 2022. I've installed the latest version of that. We'll look at it once we get into a project. First things first, we'll do create a new project. And you'll see I have .NET MAUI Blazor app as one of my templates. We can also kind of narrow this down. You can see it in the main search window as well. So we've got down here Maui.NET Blazor app. And that's what we're going to use today. And we'll be debugging and testing in that type of an application. If you don't see this template here in Visual Studio, first things first, let's talk about what we need for that. Let's look at our VS installer. And this will show you what version of Visual Studio you have and if there's any updates. You'll notice I have Visual Studio. I'm using Enterprise. Any Visual Studio version, as far as I can't remember what they're called these days. I always use Enterprise because I have Enterprise license, but there's a Community Edition, regular Visual Studio, and Enterprise. Any of those will work, but you have to be on 2022 preview. If you're not on preview, you're not going to get those Blazor Maui hybrid applications. Next thing is you need to be on 17.3 preview 2. And if you don't see that, there should be an update on the right-hand side here. So make sure you install the latest update to make sure those templates are installed. And as I said earlier, if you have all of those bits installed, you're still not seeing the .NET MAUI Blazor app template, then uninstall the preview bits for ASP.NET Preview 7 version 4. Then we can go ahead and click next into this, and we can set up a brand new Blazor MAUI app. So we'll just give this guy a name real quick. Just call this Blazor Power Hour Maui. And I don't know if this is a new Visual Studio thing. It used to fill these in kind of automatically there. We'll go ahead and drop a new project in. There's only one choice of framework right now. We'll go ahead and create this. See how we're doing in chat here as well. If there's any questions, please let me know. And if I'm sorry again for the hall mirrors, if we have if the text is not large enough, just give me a heads up, and we'll go ahead and zoom in on some of this stuff. Speaking of, I can already tell this probably needs a little bit of a zoom in here. Make this nice and big, and let's get our zoom tool up and running too, in case we need to focus in on something like the right hand side over here. So this is a Maui application and a Blazor hybrid Maui application. And you'll see some familiar stuff in here. Like we have pages, we have a shared folder, a WW root, and yeah, this is a platform application. So it runs on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, all of those things, but it is a web application running inside of a native shell. So this is actually pretty cool. If I go ahead and run this on a Windows machine, that's what it says up in the title bar here when I'm starting the application. It says Windows machine. So that means it's focused on building a Windows desktop version of the application. And it takes a hot minute to get up and running here, but there is our Blazor Maui application. Probably looks really familiar, right? We got our counter, our fetch data. These are the essentials of a Blazor Hello World project, right? If you've seen Blazor before, you've probably seen this Hello World app. But this one's different. This one is running on Windows natively. So this is actually a Windows app right here. You can see that I've got an icon on my taskbar down at the bottom of the screen. We even get the little preview window, which likes to vanish when I put my zoom tool on. But you'll get a little preview down here as I hover. It's installed on the system. You can actually see that if we do a quick uh, search here. You can see this is actually an application running here, and we can pin that to start and so on. So it is an actual application on Windows. And we could build this out for Mac as well. We could build it for iOS. We could build it for Android. We can do a quick test here, see if Android works. This wasn't working on my machine earlier, but we'll give it a shot here just for the heck of it. We'll try it on a Pixel 5, see if we can get that up and running really fast. I was having some deployment issues earlier with this. It could be my configuration on the device, emulated device. Um, but we'll let it try. And that takes a quick second. So let me jump back over, double check on chat. Y'all are quiet, very quiet today. While that builds up. So these device emulators can be a little bit slow to run sometimes. The little tip I'll give here is the first build is always the longest on these. Once you get this up and running, the device tends to boot up the second time much faster. And the load time on some of these emulators can be so slow. It's up now. So it's not too bad. I got a pretty beefy machine here. If you're not on a machine that has some really good horsepower behind it, not all of us are. You're not in control over uh, what machine you're provided at work and so on. Um, Sometimes these emulators can be a bit heavy on your machine, and they can take so long to load that initial first load. Again, they kind of load the second time a lot faster. So when you're debugging and testing your Blazor hybrid applications, if it fails the first time, go ahead and run it one more time. 'Cause sometimes that emulator is in kind of like a state where it's booting, and the build system will time out and it will fail to deploy the first time. You go ahead and run it a second time, that emulator is going to be already running, and the build system will then deploy the app and run it successfully the second time. We also have hot reload connected. I haven't quite tried out hot reload, but it does say that XAML hot reload is connected. I don't know if this works for Blazor Hybrid as of yet. We'll give that a try there and see. Oh, it did. Look at that. We have hot reload working now. So it looks like the .NET team's come quite far with the tooling on this. All right. So we're able to get that up and running in an emulator. Yeah, Fuel Snebble says, like me, my machine is 9 years old. So some of these tips might come in handy. Like I said, those emulators can be a bit to spin up. They do require virtualization to get going. So if you're like Fuel Snabble, give those apps a second try before you start, looking for problems. That might save you a little bit of a headache there. So that's my first tip of kind of testing and debugging with these Maui apps. If you're running it on Android or iOS emulators, you might want to double check those. Give them a second run. Let's look at our Windows machine again. And I'm going to try to force an error on this guy. Let's look at our data. We've got weather forecast. This is the hard-coded version here. Let's see, how can I force this to error out? This is probably one of the easiest guys to do. Let's go ahead and comment out this null check that we're doing in here and force this guy to kind of take a dive. So I'm going to comment that out. And what this is going to do is when the component initializes, this forecast array is going to be null. And it needs to do an async request before it will actually initialize with some data and render this table properly. So what's going to happen is it's going to try to for each over a null, and it should error out in here. We should get a null reference exception. Let's go ahead and fire this up and look at it in a Windows application. And if you have any questions about how this Blazor hybrid app is structured, we can go into that as well. I want to show some of the testing and debugging stuff off, but if you're in unfamiliar territory, I am more than happy to help everybody get up to speed. All right. So let's see here. Let's get our app back up on the screen. So if we're on our counter component, we're probably okay on our home page, but we should have an error here on fetch data. Let's go ahead and no, look at that. So I guess because it's not a true HTTP request or something, we're not getting that failed state. Let's go ahead and just comment out the fetch or get forecast async right here. We'll save that, and we'll probably need to restart the application to force this error in. So if this was a Blazor WebAssembly app, that definitely would have thrown an error. But since it's a native desktop application, it looks like it's able to get that data before the initial component renders because it's not actually doing HTTP request or something like that. There we go. Now we've got an error. So now we've got a null reference exception here, and it says not set to an instance of an object, and that is totally expected. That is what I wanted this to do. Let's go ahead and hit continue here. And you'll see I've got an error occurred, and we can reload the page. Now, we did get a breakpoint so we could see where the actual error was happening. This isn't always the case. We don't always get a nice break like that. Matter of fact, I think the tooling's gotten much better because the last time I tried this, all I got was this yellow banner. If you've done any Blazor dev before, you'll probably know that when you see that yellow banner pop up and you haven't gotten a breakpoint, um, you're kind of left debugging with the web um, browser's console. And in this Maui app, I don't have any way to right click and hit inspect. And if I press F12 on the keyboard, you'll notice that I actually did get some dev tools. So let's see what's in here. We can actually look and see, just like we're on a browser, we have a way to navigate and see elements. So the reason that is working is because of a new addition, and it's in that link that I sent. One that says use browser developer tools with ASP.NET Core Blazor Hybrid. Now, this is really neat. F12 did get me in there, but if that is not happening for you, maybe you've migrated an earlier Maui app that you're starting to build or just testing some things out. And this line of code isn't in there yet. So there is a service that is required to allow us to attach our web developer tools. So you should have a line in your project that says add Blazor web developer tools. And that is going to open up the ports for your web view that is inside of your application that's being hosted by that native Maui shell. This is going to open a port for the dev tools to attach to. So make sure this is enabled before you go any further if you don't get that F12 developer tooling window that I just showed you. Now, F12 seemed to work. There's also a keyboard shortcut for Control-Shift-I that also will open the DevTools window. Maybe It says within a Windows app. Windows seem to be okay with F12. I don't know about it doesn't say anything about Mac, but I would assume that this is more of a cross browser thing. It does specifically say Windows here, but I would say just because F12 may not be the same on all devices, this is an alternative. Control Shift I will open those dev tools as well. So now that we have DevTools open, we can actually debug this a little bit more like a traditional web application. I don't know, however, if this works for the Android emulator. We could try that in just a minute. This does specifically say Windows for some reason. I do know it works on Mac, though. I've seen my friend Sam Basu, who does a lot of the Maui stuff here on Code It Live, open this up on a Mac um, Catalyst version of a Maui app as well. There's also some tips that I gave him, and we can talk about some of those. Depending on how familiar you are with DevTools in the browser, there's some shortcuts that you might like to know. So one of the things I'm used to doing is kind of just clicking on something in here, right clicking and saying inspect element. We can't quite do that. We had to hit F12 to jump into DevTools to even begin with. But let's try to use our inspection tool. So this is one way you can just navigate directly to the thing you're trying to inspect. So again, if you're used to just right clicking and doing inspect element, it's kind of a habit for me. There's actually this little arrow right here that's going to dive you right into looking at what the elements are. If you want a more of a console way to do this type of thing, you can actually do that if you know what you're looking for. So let's say, for instance, I want to select the H1 on this page. If you remember jQuery at all, let's zoom this in a little bit so you can see really well. The browsers have adopted. Let's see if this. Sorry, this is Edge. This should still work. Okay. This is a Chromium thing, so this should work on all of the Chrome-based browsers, including Edge. They've kind of adopted this $ syntax. I don't know if they directly adopted it from jQuery or not. I'm assuming so because it's very evident that it looks like it. But you should be able to just come in here and do this $H1, use that query selector that you would use in like a jQuery type of scenario, and you'll actually see it focused right on it when I typed it in. And that is another way to kind of pick apart these web elements. Is if you know what you're looking for, you can type it right into the console and it will display that element for you. So that's a nice little tip. Let's see who has anybody got any questions so far in chat? No questions. I keep coming back to you all. If you do get chatty, I'll be here to answer questions. All right, so we've got our debug console and our app still. There's some other commands in here as well. I'm trying to remember what double double did off the top of my head. There's another version of this. Yeah, okay, there we go. This one gives you the properties of that element. It's a little more programmatic, like the JSON version of that item. So there's other ways to access these things, but this is probably the easiest way to do it. You also notice there's some info that this pops up that's nice and handy here as well. So you get kind of a shortcut as to how big the element is, the color, some of the CSS values that are around it. There's even some accessibility tooling in here, which is great. So you get your contrast for accessibility. The role is in here, and if it's keyboard navigable is also displayed there. So this is a really great little debugging tool right here. And that's, just a normal browser debug tool. You can see we have the console here as well. And we did get a breakpoint in our C sharp code, but if we didn't for some reason, you can see the object or the the exception being raised in the console here. So we also have a way to get to it from this perspective. Another thing that we can look at is our sources tab. This is going to have all of the web resources that are being displayed in this web view. So you can see all the CSS code that's coming up inside of this web view. Even the generated isolated CSS file is here. If you had some JavaScript interop stuff, you would find it in here as well. That sort of thing. You can even see there's some JavaScript there. The Blazor WebView.js bootstrapper that bootstraps the web view is even here. So this is essentially the things that would be in your www root directory. Um, it even has a fetch data page. This isn't very handy other than the fact that it's a quick way to look at the head of the document. This is the SPA um, page that comes up, this single page application kind of wrapper that's sitting around the web page. That's the initial load, basically, of the page before Blazor kicks in. So not going to help you too much unless you're looking at something in the shell portion of the app. You can always do network things in here. Throttling is always nice. So we've got that. Um, if you're using any kind of like JavaScript interrupt for like local storage or any of those things, you'll find that in the application tab. There shouldn't be any kind of like service workers or anything inside of this because it's inside of a Maui shell. So this is a pretty great way actually to see what's going on in uh, our web view and actually debug some of the stuff that's there. I don't know how many times I use this just to kind of see what's being rendered out, make sure some styling's not being applied, where the class tags are, and all of that stuff. And let's talk about a couple more tips here, I guess, while we've got this open. If you're doing web dev and you haven't looked at this page in a while, there is some really great tooling that has been added by the browser folks. Um, Again, this is Edge, but it's all using the same Chromium base. So any Chromium browser, Safari has this now as well, and Firefox has probably had it before the other two. You have a debugger for Flexbox and CSS Grid now. So if I come in here, you'll see little buttons above the div elements here that are using Flexbox. And if I have CSS Grid, which we can add one of those in a minute, just so you can see what it does, you'll see that we can toggle the Flexbox highlighting on and off in these elements. So it looks like we've got a Flexbox panel up at the top. You can see this is where the padding or margin is, and here's where one of the flex elements has landed. Um, and inside of that flex container, we should be able to change some of the alignment and things live here. Looks like Edge doesn't quite have the same. There, oh, there he goes. Yeah, so you can change some of the alignment of these things and how they flex by direction and whatnot. So, for example, this one's aligning center right now. You can change it to top or end, start or end. And if you're not looking up here, you probably won't see it happening. Watch this about text. You should be able to see the alignment change as I toggle these. And it's a nice way to kind of either debug or just kind of troubleshoot pesky layouts that aren't behaving properly, or even prototype a little bit inside of the dev tools here. And you can change the flex direction. We can send that item over to the other side. We can lay the flex box out in a column direction as well, just by clicking on these here. And then once you're happy with what changes you've made, you can go back to your CSS code and update those values. The same goes for CSS Grid as well. So let's go ahead and drop out of this for a second, add a little bit of a grid to our index page so you can see what that looks like. So if I were to come in here, we'll say class equals um, sample, and we'll target a grid in here. We need to throw a couple items in it. Let's just put in, I think we have Bootstrap in here. What's a little bootstrappy thing that we can use to display some items? Get Bootstrap. I just want to have some kind of uh, item that looks decent. So we'll be able to see the layout of these things. Let's see here. I've used Bootstrap in quite some time. Alerts should be good. There we go. So we'll throw a couple alerts in here. We'll just grab this right here off the clipboard and toss it into our project. So here is some alerts, and let's go ahead and arrange those into a grid. We'll go in here and say add a new item. This is our index page, and we want to add a style sheet to it. So we'll use some CSS isolation here and just say index.razor.css. And then in our sample, we will tell this one to display grid. And then we will do some grid template columns, and we'll break this guy up. Grid columns use fractional elements or fractional widths. I always suggest using these as much as possible. You can use other values for fraction, but fraction is basically a ratio it's dividing the grid into. So we could do something like this is twice the size as the next column. So this defines the number of columns. As many of these as we want to add, we could keep going here and just say FR again and so on for the amount of columns that we want to place in our grid. Let's go ahead and save that. We'll rerun the app. And then we can go into DevTools and we can see how the DevTools editor works to help us debug grid layouts in our Blazor app. So you can see they're laid out side by side here. It does have a grid layout, but it's not perfect. So we can go into our DevTools again, F12. We'll jump you in there, or Control Shift I. Then we can click on our little selector tool here and navigate down to one of those elements. And then you can also navigate back up here to see that they're in a grid. Let's go ahead and put this side by side. We can see a little better. There's our grid button. So if I click on the grid button, you can actually see the coordinates of the grid. So there's the coordinates of the CSS grid. So we've got coordinate 1, 1 here. And then on the opposite side, you'll see some negative element or negative coordinates. So we got -1 and 3 here. So this is the third column start. There is no actual third column, but this is where a third column would start. This -1, it's counting backwards. So it's -1, -2, -3. And the negative numbers are handy because we might want to reverse direction on something. And if we don't know the number of columns and we want to put something at the end, we can always reference -1, and that will give us the last grid line. Also, we can span something across grid lines, and we can say from column 1 to -1 will always span all columns, no matter how many we have. So that's a nice little CSS tip there. But this grid debugger is really nice to have. We can see these grid lines, and we can see that there's no gap in between these items. So something we might want to do if we're troubleshooting or doing a little bit of design work here is just to say gap. We'll give it a 1 rem value, and look at that. We've added a gap in the tool. The dev tools are showing us where that gap is in between those items. We toggle that off. See, it's some nice white space there. Toggle it back on. There's where our gap is. So that little grid button is super handy at figuring out what exactly is going on with our layouts and maybe why something isn't working. Pretty cool. Let's see here. Let's jump over to chat and Mr. Blazor, Mr. Magoo, Mr. Magoo is here. Welcome. Nice to see you. Mr. Magoo, I think you fixed my Chrome problem the other day. I had a very interesting problem with Chrome on my laptop this week. Unfortunately, it happened during a live event, in-person event when I was presenting. Chrome just decided it was going to render all of the text in the browser invisible, which makes it really hard to demo Blazor applications. So yeah, so after much troubleshooting, Mr. Magoo is like, delete all of the files in your app data folder that pertain to Chrome and see if that helps. And I think that actually did fix it, Mr. Magoo. That was you that said that, right? I know a couple people were trying to help me with that issue, but I'm pretty sure it was you that finally got the actual solution there. Um, so we go back to screen share here. We're just taking a look at the Chrome DevTools in the browser. You can find the docs for this up at docs.microsoft.com to use your developer tools with Blazor Hybrid. It's really just as simple as adding this. This is now part of the default template, by the way. I don't know if I showed exactly where that lives in the code, but if we stop the application from running and we go down to our program CS, it's going to be named after your, uh, actually, I think it's named Maui Program CS for Maui for some reason. Uh, this is where you will find it, and there is that exact line of code that was in the docs. It is awkwardly offset for some reason. There we go. Little attention to detail from me there. That's going to drive me insane if it doesn't line up properly. There's our if statement, our if def statement around this thing. If it's in debug mode, then go ahead and just let us access our web developer tools. You would definitely want this if statement around here. You wouldn't want people accessing these web dev tools in deployment mode. This is going to leave a port open that your debug tools are attaching to. So you definitely don't want to have that accessible. I don't know if they could really do anything super malicious there, but it's just, better they not have that access. I did say I would try this. This is something I haven't actually given a shot. Judging from the docs, it's not a thing, but let's see if we can get this up on Android as well. Let's see how Android behaves with the DevTools enabled. Let's see if it'll accept our Control-Shift-I or our F12 inside of a native Android emulator. So there's our page with our grid smattered across it. You hit Control, you get pinch and zoom, which is interesting. There's quite a lot of different dev tooling things inside of the emulator, like rotation and whatnot, that we don't normally get on a desktop app. Let's see if F12 does absolutely nothing here. The other one was Control-Shift-I. No. So those dev tools look like they're only available from the desktop application so far. It would be nice to have these in Android or in an emulator, because we could use it to debug layouts and things while we're on mobile without having to resort to resizing the browser or something. Or we might get errors that are cropping up in our Android applications that aren't existing on our desktop applications because we have some different code paths there. For those, we should be able to set breakpoints on specific services and things, and it should break out into um, the application itself. So, for example, this is still broken here. If we navigate to our fetch data page, and there it is, we hit it without hitting a breakpoint. Did I run it without debugging? Let's see here. No, we looks like we're in debug mode. Let's double check this before I do anything else. Yeah, we want to run with debugging. Start without start debugging. Make sure we definitely are in debug mode. And we'll navigate to fetch data again. We have an error that occurred, but no breakpoint. Let's try setting. There's nothing to break on essentially here. Let's go into this. Let's purposely set it null. Let's see if we can actually hit a breakpoint here. As far as I'm concerned, we should be able to actually break on code. Last time I checked this was working. We should be able to break on a breakpoint in our application. There we go. So we can set up scenarios where things do hit breakpoints. It is kind of strange that this one broke by default on a Windows app, so I didn't have to force it with a null. As soon as it hit a null, it broke. Actually, it broke in the Razor view up here, where it was trying to iterate over the items. So let's see if we can actually set a breakpoint on that. Maybe that's where the limitation is at with Android. Is it can't break in on the Razor code. So we got there. It's going to try to for each, and that's where the error occurs. So it's not. It did break on it. It looks like, but it didn't break when it hit the error on it. Very, very interesting. So, mileage might vary a little bit between platforms on how these things actually work out. So, looks like traditional breakpoints inside of your code work. It looks like we can set breakpoints on for each, but it's not automatically breaking on an error. Uh, Maybe it's just the way I've got things set up, or maybe it's something to do with Maui. I'm not quite sure. We can set a breakpoint in Razor, though. And I do have the ability to inspect the values here. So it does say that it's null, but when it hits the null, the error kind of gets swallowed up and repeated out with that yellow banner um, at the bottom of the app versus actually the way it was handled in the native Windows application. It actually broke into the app through the error message right here on where the error took place. So little bit of a difference between the two. So pretty interesting from that regard. All right. So I was going to talk about testing a little bit. I couldn't quite get the example I had working. Um, I can talk about what I was going to show for a few minutes, and then we can discuss a little bit of B unit. So let's go ahead and open another app up real quick. I'll keep this one open in the background as well. So we can bounce back and forth. I have a solution up on GitHub that I thought folks would find interesting, but it looks like with this latest Visual Studio update, there was some new Maui bits that shipped. I haven't had a lot of time to troubleshoot this yet, but it looks like it has something to do with possibly a source generator or something in that regard. There's like an order of operations or something that's broken where it's not compiling the Blazor client application before the Maui shell application launches. So what I should be able to do here is I have a Blazor web application that is not a Maui app. And if I come in here and with my Blazor server and start a instance of my Blazor server app, this is the application on the web. I should be able to load this into a Blazor Hybrid application as well. And it's all using a shared code base. So this is a Blazor WebAssembly app. This is a an ASP.NET Core web server. I have some shared code, and then I have a Blazor Hybrid app. The Blazor Hybrid app is sharing dependencies on the client app. And when I do that, it's going to pull in all of the pages and all of the shared components, uh, anything that is, essentially a class, should be pulled into my Maui app and just use it as a reference. Also, it's going to pull in the www root file. So that's just the way that the uh, .NET applications work when you reference uh, the WebAssembly app. It sees the www root uh, directory as a resource, and it will pull it in, and it will even conflict with uh, dupes inside of the www root file of the Maui application. So you can see I have in here two index files, but I had to name them separately or name them differently so they don't conflict with each other. Because essentially, when I reference uh, the Blazor WebAssembly app as a dependency, the Maui app gains access to the www root folder, and it doesn't namespace them. So they're both www root, and if it sees the same files in both, it will throw an error saying that there's duplicates of that file. So it should be able to read the resources and components from my WebAssembly app, and then just render them in the Maui Blazor hybrid view. So I don't have to have two code bases keeping sync with the same, components and HTML and Razor components and whatnot. And even the www root stuff, I don't have to have like some sort of build script that copies the CSS over to this www root. Because it has that dependency reference, it can access them. So that's a really simple way to set up a Maui app that targets desktop and mobile and still have a web app, um, all from a single code base. However, whatever this update did, I can no longer build. So this worked yesterday. Of course, I try to do a show today, and there's an update, and now my build doesn't work anymore. And the error is that it can't find the DLL that the Blazor WebAssembly app is supposed to produce. So it's something with the build pipeline. Yeah, cannot find file Blazor core.client DLL. So something to do with the way that DLL is being generated. So it may be something in the build configuration here that I wasn't required to set up before. But the point I was trying to make for the show today, we're talking about debugging and testing, is that we could come into this and add a new project here and have an all-in-one solution, one solution with many projects, and one of those would be an XUnit project for unit tests. And we would add, let's see, some tests for like core business logic and things using XUnit. And we would add that to the project as well. So now you could see how this might start panning out to have a one-size-fits-all solution where we have our WASM app, our server with our endpoints and all of that, various shared items between client, server, and Maui, and then a Maui app that can reference stuff from the WebAssembly components. Again, there's nothing really different between a WebAssembly Razor component and a hybrid Razor component. They're both Razor components. The only thing that might change between those is how you fetch your data. So Razor components are pretty generic in their architecture and they will work in Maui. So you should be able to reference them that way. And then you can just have a set of tests that can test logic in your client server or Maui app. And then you could also extend this to use BUnit and test your components as well. So if you haven't seen BUnit before, BUnit is a fantastic testing library for Blazor, and it is focused on testing the rendered output of the components, the Razor components. So this is specific for testing Razor components. So you might have something like this where you're testing your counter page. Then you can write an XUnit test that renders a test context and then actually renders out a counter component inside of BUnit's rendering engine. It's using what is that thing called? The sharp. Um, I know it. Angle sharp to render out the component. You can actually click on buttons and make sure that the component is functioning properly right inside of this unit test, and your application never has to load to do this. So if you have your project structured where everything is being shared from a core library into uh, different slices of functionality. You've got your server that can be XUnit tested, you got your shared that could be XUnit tested. Things inside of both your clients or your web and your Maui application can be XUnit tested. And then all of your BUnit tests will target your Razor pages and files, um, your Razor components essentially, and test all of those. And since these are just reused by the Maui app, then they're essentially tested there as well. So you'll have a test project for core logic with XUnit. You might have another test project with BUnit to test components. But you can see a single solution can be made to test all of those things, and that can be very easy to work with. That's one of the reasons I like Blazor so much. It's really starting to get there. It's pretty close. I need to figure out what is causing that compilation to fail. I think I'm going to try breaking that out into one more project where it's just our Razor components in a Razor class library, which is what they suggest on the Blazor docs. It was nice when we could do it with just the WASM application as the dependency for the Maui hybrid app, but apparently that's not working anymore. So while it was nice, it might not be as practical as a Razor class library. So if you look at the link that I shared earlier, I can share this again. Just make sure everybody has it. The use browser tools with Blazor Hybrid. There's also the next item down on the list is to reuse Razor components. I'll share this in chat again for anybody who hasn't seen that yet. This is an approach that I'm going to try next, and they outline here that you have a WebAssembly server and the web view, which would be your Maui app, all referencing a Razor class library. So we'll try that next. It's a shame that the feature that I was using kind of broke, but this looks to be the recommended way to do things. So we'll try that this time. And I'm publishing these things up on GitHub on my personal account, by the way. If you want to see that, I'll drop a link in chat for my GitHub page. Again, currently broken. So if you do find it up there, it doesn't work right now, but I hope to get that fixed, and I'll add some testing examples to it, so we can use things like BUnit and of course Telerik Just Mock Um, if you do have a web solution, like I suggested, not everybody's going to have a web solution to add. But if you do have, like it says here, a WebAssembly project, a server project, and a WebView project, if you have all three of those, you can also test using Test Studio. Test Studio right now doesn't have a way to dive into a desktop Blazor Hybrid application and test things in there. But if you're rendering that stuff on a web server, in a normal WebAssembly project, you could totally test that in the browser with Test Studio. So that could offer another layer of testing. So we'll definitely revisit this topic as the tooling gets better from the Microsoft side, and see if we can get the best of all worlds, the web, desktop, and mobile all up at the same time with unit testing. And of course, the new browser testing tools make things so much nicer to work with Blazor Hybrid um, in that shell. And as soon as they add it to the emulators, or if it's possible to add it to the emulators, we'll kind of take a look at that again too. But that's all I've got for today, folks. It's been an hour already. Can you believe it or not? So hopefully that helped out. We talked about a couple debugging tips here. If you're installing Blazor Hybrid, make sure you're on the latest version of Visual Studio Preview. That's step one. If you're not seeing your MAUI templates, your Blazor Hybrid templates, your MAUI stuff isn't showing in Visual Studio, go back into your system where the apps are installed and uninstall on .NET 7 previews. Take those out of your system, um, reboot your PC, and those things should show up in Visual Studio. After that, if you're on Mac and you're having problems just installing the tooling for Blazor Hybrid, uh, same thing. Check and make sure you um, don't have .NET Preview installed, .NET 7 Preview. It will break things on Mac as well. I've had to just take this out of every system I own until they figure out how to get side-by-side installations working with with MAUI and .NET 7 Preview. It just does not work, folks. So that's troubleshooting step number one. Get those previews out of your system. Um, the other thing was the links that I shared. That's currently up on the screen here now. You can use browser developer tools if you have the service in your MAUI app, which comes in by default right now, and you're in debug mode. And then you can hit Control Shift I, jump right into the browser dev tools and tinker around in there. F12 seems to be working for me as well. So check that out. That's a really nice have, almost a must-have feature for getting anything done with any kind of productivity. So it's awesome to see the .NET team came through with that one. And I showed off a couple tips on how to navigate around that, since it's not quite the normal experience of like right click inspect element. You can actually type those into your console, or you can just use the little toolbar to find those items. So there's some handy stuff there as well. We'll see you all next week sometime. I don't have a show title lined up yet, but I know we'll be back. Might grab Sam Basu, see what he's been up to. We'll report back to you guys and bring some fresh content. This afternoon, I'll be talking to John Bristow. Got that show coming up in about 5 hours. We'll do a little Eat, Sleep, Code news show and talk about some of the stuff that's been happening in the tech world this week. I've also got shows that I'm posting up on SoundCloud. We did some interviews the last few weeks here for Eat Sleep Code. So I've got Jonathan Danielko interview going up on SoundCloud. You can also catch the replays of that on YouTube if you want to see our faces while we chat. We'll be up on YouTube. If you just want to kind of listen to the podcast as you like mow the lawn or have a commute, that is up on SoundCloud under Eat Sleep Code or in your favorite podcast uh, applications. Smab UK, you always come at the last possible moment. I'm wondering now if you do this just out of spite. I'm just teasing. Good to see you all and take care. Bye bye.